In this short video, I'll be taking a look at the TV unit from component 2 of the Eduqas Media GCSE specification with a focus on the Sweeney. The Sweeney is a crime drama which first aired in 1975. It ran for 4 series, finishing in 1978, and there have subsequently been 3 films made based on the series. The key point from these facts is the fact that it was aired in 1975. It is a 70s crime drama, and everything we're going to be considering about the Sweeney here and everything you might be asked about the Sweeney will relate to the context in which it was set. Before we do that, we'll think about what the aims of the Sweeney were when it was first produced. It was designed to reflect the life of officers in the Flying Squad, which was a special branch of the Met Police focused on organised crime. And that's where the name of the show comes from, because the colloquial name for the Flying Squad amongst the criminal fraternity of the time was the Sweeney, because it is a shortened version of Sweeney Todd, which of course rhymes with Flying Squad. So it's a bit of rhyming slang, and that's where the Sweeney gets its name. Another aim was to create verisimilitude. This is the appearance of real life in the media or in fiction, and that's why they use real life London locations and buildings throughout the show. And the third aim was to reflect the corruption that existed in the Flying Squad at the time. There were several high-profile investigations and indeed arrests into corruption within this department of the Met Police during the 1970s. And so audiences at the time would be well aware of this and could relate to some of the themes and some of the policing methods that we see in the show. It's important to consider some of the codes and conventions of the 1970s when it comes to crime drama. And we've studied Luther alongside this text. And we'll consider some of the ways in which codes and conventions were different in the 1970s, but some of those codes and conventions still remain in modern crime dramas such as Luther. These are the ones that are distinctive to the 1970s. So we have exclusively white male protagonists to reflect attitudes towards race and ethnicity at the time. We have men in positions of authority. There are no women in positions of authority in this set text, or really indeed in crime drama at all at the time. Similarly, female roles are confined to those of administration, the domestic role. They often play the love interest, and quite often women play the stereotypical damsel in distress. In terms of criminality, it's much more low-level criminality in 1970s crime drama. We've got theft and robbery, but underground criminality as well, as we'll see in this episode. We've got this idea that criminals are based in these sort of darkened rooms and operating out of warehouses and storage, but it's all sort of this underground, low-level organised crime. And finally, we've got this idea of single episode narratives. We get a crime established and it finishes in the same episode, unlike something like Luther, which is a series where crimes and characters and issues run throughout the series. So some of the codes and conventions that it has in common with modern crime drama, including Luther. We've got the Sweeney really was the first crime drama which represented the police as being fallible, as being flawed, and we've got a flawed protagonist here in Regan. We've also got the maverick lead detective. Regan as well is that sort of maverick who doesn't follow the rules, who reacts against authority. We've got police violence and corruption, and that is reflective of issues, as I've already said, issues within the Met Police at the time. And we've got this good cop, bad cop dynamic, and we see that very same thing still being played out in crime dramas today, including Luther. Let's have a look at how some of these codes and conventions play out in this episode then. We've got that low-level underground criminality. Here we've got Brian Blessed's character on the right. He's that sort of criminal mastermind who sits behind the scenes in oak-decked offices with leather chairs. He's masterminding it all. But we've also got on the left here the two car thieves who get involved, and they're quite simple in a way. Intellectually, they're represented as being slightly uneducated. They're slightly idiotic in terms of the way they approach crime. It's that kind of low-level criminality. And then, of course, we've got the use of cash here, which very much places the Sweeney in the 1970s. So lots of the mise-en-scène, but also the character types, place it within its setting at the time. The representation of policing is quite interesting. One of the lines here, and the line actually, this is the shot in the top right-hand corner where John Thor arrives at the office and starts getting dressed, which kind of shows his sort of laid-back maverick attitude to the job. But he also says, he talks about one of the people thereafter, "I'll rip his ears off when we find him." And that alludes to that sort of violent policing that was very typical of 1970s crime drama, and which we still see today. In the top left-hand shot, they catch the criminal and they plant evidence on him. They plant a weapon on him. They plant money on him. And that is all linking to this idea of corruption within the policing of the 1970s. In the shot, the middle one on the left, we've got Regan in conflict with his boss. And this is very typical of 1970s policing, the maverick lead detective rising up against authority and reacting against authority. In the bottom left picture, this is our introduction to Regan, the first shot we get of him, and he arrives in this sort of oriental silky dressing gown, which shows his sort of his laid-back attitude, but also there's drink on the table. This is that idea of the maverick lead detective, doesn't take the job too seriously, a flawed character, as we've already talked about. And then we've got the bottom right picture is about policing methods. You can see here the way in which evidence was obtained through the use of the camera, and the mise-en-scène there very much places this episode within the 1970s. It's very typical of 1970s crime drama, but also policing methods of the time. Representations of women are very straightforward in the Sweeney and very typical of the 1970s. We are introduced to John Thor's partner in the middle shot here, and initially she's under a duvet or under a bedspread. So the woman is anonymous, and it tells us that the female character is of little importance here. He also leaves her behind in the home, so she's very much an object of the domestic world, and she appears just to be here as a love interest. But then in the picture on the left, she's a victim of crime. The criminals come to visit her and they threaten her with a hot iron. So she is the stereotypical damsel in distress that we would expect in 1970s crime drama. And then the shot on the right, Regan, John Thor's character, comes to rescue her. So she's the rescued damsel in distress and he's the stereotypical male hero. So the representations of gender are very much in keeping with the patriarchal attitudes of the 1970s. There are some cultural references which very much place this episode within the 1970s, and this one in particular where they go to the shop to try and get some evidence and some information, and we can see the swastika logo all over this shop, and this is something that which could not be displayed in modern crime drama, because there is a much greater awareness of the offence we are causing through racial slurs and prejudice and the symbols of racial prejudice of the past. So this is very much placing this in the 1970s and conveying the fact that there was a much more relaxed attitude to prejudice than there is today. And then the final convention, I think, is in terms of narrative structure. We get a resolution at the end of this episode that we don't in modern crime drama. When we watch Luther, the crime is established in episode 1, but it is not resolved. It is ongoing as part of a series. In the Sweeney, each episode stands alone. There is continuity of character and continuity of setting, but they are single-stranded narratives. They begin with a crime and the crime is solved by the end of the episode. And that's very typical of 1970s crime drama. And we get the death of Brian Blessed's character at the end here as the crime is solved and everything is settled. So in terms of Todorov's narrative structure, we get the equilibrium, the disruption, and the new equilibrium established at the end, and the police always win. What might this look like in terms of a question? Well, a question you might get is, how are crime dramas a reflection of the time in which they are produced? A question about the Sweeney will be relating to context. It might be a 10 marker or a 12 marker. You'll need to refer to 2 or 3 different elements of context, and you would need 2 to 3 examples for each contextual point. So possible points of context which you might talk about are corruption in the police force, the subservient nature of women, police violence, low-level criminality, and other cultural references. And as an example, I'm going to talk about the representation of women here and how it places it very much as part of the 1970s. The Sweeney is very much a reflection of British society and attitudes in 1975 when Series 1 was first screened. In particular, the representation of women is typical of the patriarchal attitudes of the time. When we first meet Regan's wife, she is under a duvet as if she is anonymous. It appears that she is there merely as a love interest and as a plot device. Moreover, in a later scene, she is threatened with a hot iron by one of the criminals, and the fearful expression on her face constructs her as the archetypal damsel in distress, with Regan the hero who rescues her, both characters therefore fulfilling the character roles expected of them within the genre of crime fiction at the time. So, and then you'd need to do another contextual point with 2 or 3 examples to go with it for your 10 marks. So it's all about explaining how the Sweeney is typical of the genre, but also of the social context of the time. I hope that's been useful. What you might want to do now is to think about writing the second paragraph for this answer, picking a different area of context and identifying your examples to go with it.